أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. A few days ago, when I stood up to address the Lajna of Canada at Toronto, I had made my plan to address them on the subject of how to escape the toxic effects of a materialistic environment and how to take care of the children so that they grow up in the ideal traditions of Islam. I had my own plans, but when a poem of Hazrat Masih Maud al-Islam was recited in praise of Allah, I was so overwhelmed by the message that I forgot all that I had planned mentally and took up the subject of the discussion in Hazrat Masih Maud al-Islam's poem. Because in fact it was the same thing, but expressed much better in a more organized manner and more profoundly. The subject was love of God. Love of God is the ultimate of all religions. If a religion fails to create true love of God, that religion is just meaningless. If you consider yourself to be religious and yet have not tasted of love of God, then you are wandering in wilderness and you believe that you are a religious person, but you cannot be. Love of God, the essence, is the essence of all religion. But how to love Him, that is the question. That is what was taught to me that day by that poem of Masih Maud al-Islam in a manner that had never dawned upon me before. The poem was sung in a beautiful voice, deeply penetrating. It sank into the very recesses of hearts. But there I also mentioned the point that good voices are good carrier of message. But sometimes the beauty and charm of the voice distracts from the message itself, and one is lost only in the music of the voice without receiving any message. Afraid, and that is what I mentioned to the audience there, that observed the impression on the faces, I thought them lost in the music, but not delving deep into the love of God, which was the purpose of that poem. Now I took up this subject because I know Love of God is panacea for all else. That is something which is seldom emphasized in religion, although in name it is. You hear of love of God in every religion, of course, but the real message of every religion is to hate each other in the name of God. That is why religion has terrified people, because each religion platform speaks in the name of God and preaches the hatred of mankind. There is a paradox in this. Are you too close? All right? Okay. There is a paradox in this situation of claims and practices. In the name of God, only love can be preached, and love of all mankind, with total disregard to the religious following of people, their races, their color, their creeds. Love of God is something which overwhelms everything. Love of God is the motive force of the evolution. Love of God is the ultimate cause and the ultimate effect as well. It's a fantastic thing to know what love of God is, and once you know how to love, then all your problems here on earth will be resolved. Herein lies a message for the politician. Herein lies a message for the economist. Herein lies a message for the social reformers. But seldom do we employ this most powerful instrument of reformation for the sake of improving the quality of life here on earth. So, please do it once and for all. Thank you. Are you satisfied with this now? Of course he has to do his duty. I'm grateful to him, but also it causes some disturbances. Now, the speech which I delivered in Canada, was unfortunately lost, in the sense that no recording was made. It was not even transmitted through MTA to Canada or America or other countries of the world. There was some unavoidable difficulties. I thought of mismanagement, but I was told the difficulties were created by the weather. There was a storm just before, the night before, and it disrupted with the cables which were responsible, which were laid there for the purpose of communication. Whatever the reason, the speech was totally lost. I promised them, in fact, that I would take up the same issue later in my address to Lajna in the United States. But in view of what I have just told you, I think I have to take up, right from the beginning, the entire subject. Though it is not possible for me to remember exactly where I started and where the time interrupted me, but I'll do it as it comes to my mind. And the first thing which I mentioned, I remember, is to learn how to love God from those who know how to love God, who have their personal experiences. As such, I told them that Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one leader in the entire world who fell in love with God like no man ever had fallen in love with him, who was recognized as the best lover by. And the Holy Quran, speaking on the same subject, informs us, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. O Muhammad, deliver this message to the mankind, that if you love God, then follow me. That is, follow Muhammad. Now, the answer is rather a strange answer. Instead of taking up the subject of love of God with a response that if you love God, God will love you. But this is not what the verse says. It says, tell the mankind that if you love God, then follow me. Then God will love you. Now, it is a very profound message which informs us that to claim love of God is just meaningless. Every people in the name of religion claim to be lovers of God. But how that love is expressed, in what terms it is expressed, and in what way can it change the environment, the society around, that is the question. The true love of God is live. It is a very vital source of transformation of things. With love you can bring about revolutions. And this is what I want to emphasize here now. Love is the ultimate of all forces you find in nature. They talk of unified field. But what is a unified field? In physics, in the terms of physics, that's the ultimate force which gets transformed into other forms of force, disguised as other forces, but it remains the one original single force of attraction. And that one original single source of attraction is gravitational pull. That is love. Nothing but love. The scientists simply cannot understand that force, how it works. But they know that all things which exist pull each other. And it is that eternal love of the substance for the substance, of one thing for the other, which is responsible for the entire natural phenomenon to work with. That single force is responsible for the whole universe to go on and to evolve. This is the meaning of love expressed in scientific terms. In religious terms, it begins with Ana. The first word used by the Holy Quran in introducing himself is Anallahu Alamu. I am the Lord, I am God. And strangely, it is the same Ana, that is the ego in man, which works to the opposite of Ana of God. And thus all the problems begin. The struggle of the ungodly forces is also led by one Ana, the realization of one's own self. And the struggle of all godly forces also begin with the Ana, but in that case the Ana of God. The ultimate purpose of life is to unite these two ultimate eternal forces, which is love of man for himself and love of man for the self of God. When they unite, then the purpose of life is completed. But this is a complicated affair. I don't want to go into further detail of the philosophy of love and the powers it holds, but I turn to the subject of Hazrat Masih Maud love of God, how he expressed it. First of all, he made it very clear that all he learned of the love of God was from his holy master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was his teacher. He told him the finest qualities of love. He demonstrated to him how those finest qualities of love are to be expressed in relation to God. And by following him footstep after footstep, he reached the ultimate goal, that is his communion with God and his meeting in God with God and his falling in love with God so completely that nothing of his self was left. All Ana was destroyed. Now this is a very noble, a very lofty task set up before us, But when you begin to learn how to follow this step by step, then the things become so easy and comfortable. The task does not seem to be so challenging and so difficult to perform. It becomes so easy and natural. And the easiness of the task can be only made with love, by nothing else. Hazrat Masih Maud, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, speaks on the qualities of love, emphasizing that it is love which makes every difficult task easy and comfortable. Without it, the life will become boring and meaningless and purposeless. It is love which is needed for running the entire machinery of the whole universe. So Hazrat Masih Maud in a eulogy for love says, "Ay muhabbat ajab asar numaya kar di, zakhm marham barahe yaad tu yaksan kar di." Oh love, what a strange thing you are. You have brought about strange things in myself. Zakhm marham barahe yaad tu yaksan kar di. You have made the sense of pain and injury and the ointment which soothes the pain and injury as one. You have made them equal in the path of my beloved. Now this is a strange message. Only one who knows the meaning of love could have even thought of such a thing. In the path of the love of my beloved, Hazrat Masih Maud says, "O love, you have made injury and pleasure all the same thing. You have made wound and the balm which soothes it one and the same thing to us." An ordinary person perhaps will fail to understand the full import of this statement, but with reference to the prophets of Allah, one can really understand. The prophets of Allah are those who suffer so much in the name of God. And they, in fact, apparently, to the outside observer, they waste their life, the entire life, the only life they have here on earth, throughout the period, the span which is granted them here, in a pursuit which does not seem to be attainable in their lifetime. Yet they continue to suffer without a protest. For what purpose? What grants them strength to do so? Hazrat Masih Maud has informed, because he knew the way, he knew the path, that in the love of God, the injury, the misery, the wounds inflicted in his path become a source of pleasure. To the one who does not know these things, the prophets seem to suffer so much, but they could not suffer for nothing. It is wrong to say that they go on suffering without any purpose, without any reward. The reward is the love of God which they gain. The sight of love of God in which they continue to live is the reward of their suffering. And they prefer the pleasure of love to the suffering in the path of God, so that those who think they are spending a life of terrible misery and infliction, they are sadly mistaken. It is heaven on earth in which they live. Otherwise, they could not have sustained the difficulty set upon the prophets in the pursuit of their noble cause. So this is love, and Hazrat Masih Maud goes on further to explain the meaning of love by saying, "Ay muhabbat ajab asar numaya kar di, zakhm marham barahe yaad tu yaksan kar di, ta na diwane shudam, hosh na amad basaram." Ta na diwane shudam, hosh na amad basaram. Ay janu, girde tu gardam ke cheh sa kar di. Until I was turned mad, stark mad with love. I had not gained that ultimate realization of things, the ultimate awareness of the whole universe and its meaning. It did not dawn upon me until the love had turned me stark mad. Messiah addressing the love says, I want to circuit round you like a performer of a Hajj performs his pilgrimage round Khana Kaaba and circuits round Khana Kaaba. So, O love, you are my Khana Kaaba. I go round and round and round you. What blessings you have brought upon me. Now, madness and love are in fact two different names for one and the same thing in the path of Allah. All prophets of God were blamed to be mad people. The madness of love it was, which was displayed in their whole life. And that madness of love is the ultimate of wisdom, according to Hazrat Masih Maud. So this is the love to which I intend to draw your attention, to feel it yourself, to delve deep into, to lose your person entirely in love, but in love of God, not in the love of the material things of life. The love of the material things of life is the love for your own self. So that is why I began with the comparison between the two ultimate realization of things. In humans, all humans, in fact, continue to worship their own selves. All their motives, all the purpose of their exercises go round and round their own ego, and for all practical purposes, they worship themselves. On the other hand, there is the ego of God, from whom their ego emanates and distances itself. What is satanic is to push the ego of man further away from the ego of God. And until you return to the ego of God with love, profoundly and madly having fallen in love with God, you cannot destroy your own idol within yourselves. That is the ego of man. So this is the meaning of the unity of God. This is the meaning that there is no God but one. You have to destroy yourself, your inner ego, your realization of your own self, for the purpose of gaining God's attention and God's pleasure, so that all you live for is for the realization of what God wants us to do. Your will is drowned in the will of God. Your person is lost in the person of God. This is the ultimate of creation for which we are created. The ultimate purpose of creation for which we are created. But this sounds like a sermon. How you can do? How can you go about it? How can you achieve this purpose? This is the real question which has been answered by Hazrat Masih Maud. He says, बिन देखे किस तरह किसी मारूफ पे आया दिल, कैसे कोई ख्याली सनम से लगाए दिल। दीदार में गर नहीं है तो गुफ्तार ही सही, हुस्न जमाल यार के आसार ही सही। He says, how is it possible to fall in love with an imaginary beloved if you have never had the pleasure of talking to him or of seeing him? At least you should have had the pleasure of communion with him, talking to him, communicating with him. Otherwise, the love of God is just meaningless. The claim of love of God is only hollow. This is exactly what Buddha told some of the visitors from a Hindu temple. He said, you claim that you can lead to God. But have you been to God? Do you come from God? If not, then how can you lead to Him? He said, I am from God. I have come from Him. And to Him I have returned here on this life. That is how I have become eternal. And only that is the only way to call people to God. First to reach God yourself, then to return to the world from there. And that is exactly what is said of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in respect of his potential to lead men to God. Of course, every prophet calls towards God, but the potentials of various prophets differ. The potential of our Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam is described in a verse which says, Dana fatadalla fakana qaba qawsaini aw adna. He went to God, leaving the entire world behind him, severing his ties with the world around, and reached Him ultimately so closely that nothing was left between him and God but the boundary line of Creator and the creation, which separated the Creator from the creation. But having seen Him, having loved Him, having fallen in love with Him, as none before had fallen in love with Him, He did not stay put there. He returned to mankind. Why did He return to mankind? This is the meaning of love. Because to love the Creator requires the love of mankind as well. To love the Creator requires the love to love His creation, without which you cannot love the Creator. How can you fall in love with an artist if you hate his masterpiece of art? Man is the masterpiece of Allah's creation. So for Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to have been so close to God as none of His creation had been before, would not serve the purpose until He returned to mankind, but this time on behalf of God. This time to call mankind to the ultimate pleasure which man is created for, but of which he knows little. So He returned to mankind, as the Holy Quran describes, tadalla, which is also an expression used for a bow laden with fruit. When a bow is laden with fruit, then it comes closer to the reach of people. So that is the expression used by the Holy Quran. When he was laden with the fruit of Allah, he lowered himself to the reach of mankind so that he could share with them what he had gained. So love begets love, and this is the meaning of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam's having found the way to Allah and having returned to the mankind for His sake, to take them to God. Now this is the message for the whole mankind. Here the divisions of religions do not mean anything. They do not count. They just disappear. God is the common factor in all religions. Love of God is the only meaningful purpose of all religions. So if you are taught how to love God, then you have achieved the purpose of religion. What do you bother about what name is given to that religion? The love of God is the religion. Different names are granted to it, given to it, have been given to it at different times. But if a religion is potent enough to carry you to God through love, on the wings of love, that is what man requires, and that is what man can dream of, should dream of, and that is the ultimate purpose of his creation. So Hazrat Masih Maud speaking of love, defining it through his own personal experiences, is now singing a hymn to the praise and love of God. It is so profound, so full of meaning. It's amazing how he could pack so much in a matter of a few words of each line of this poem. So I am going to refer to this poem verse after verse to tell you what God is. Why should we love? Singing the hymn to the glory of God says, Hamdo sana usi ko jo zaat javedani हमसर नहीं है उसका कोई न कोई सा नहीं. All praise belongs to God. All praise belongs to Him and to Him alone. He is the only object worthy of praise who is everlasting. Now it's a very profound statement. We fall in love with things which are beautiful, which are praiseworthy. But if this worthiness always comes to an end and deteriorates and disintegrates into nothingness, how can that praise attract us towards that something forever? The love will become ultimately an onerous duty and no more. Those who fall in love with people and reach jointly an old age, they of course take care of each other, but not propelled by that love, which was the initial cause of joining them. It is a sense of moral duty. It's a sense of companionship that carries on. Otherwise, of course, it is a burden to live with an old man ridden with diseases and burdened with problems. Every joint creaks and cracks, and every motion is a source of pain and suffering. To live with such a companion is no joy indeed. But people pull on in the name of loyalty. But they are not worthy of love, because no one else falls in love with them. Even the children who used to love their parents, most often when they reach that old age, leave them and abandon them to old houses, to houses of the old people. And it becomes an extremely demanding task for them even to visit them once or twice a year. This is what becomes of human loves and human choices. Hazrat Masih Maud reminds us that the praise is that praise. This is everlasting. There is no change whatsoever in it. If an object worthy of praise, if he is unchanging, and remains at the same level of beauty, even that could become boring. But that is not the case of God, because the Holy Quran says, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَانٍ فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. God has an eternal beauty, but His beauty manifests every moment so differently. It's so changeable. There is no question of any boredom when you fall in love with Him. He goes on displaying an aspect of beauty which amazes you, and you wonder at that aspect having not been noticed before you. And then when you turn the corner, there is another aspect of His beauty, and yet another corner, and there is another aspect of His beauty. Every moment of human awareness presents some beauty of God, where each of His attributes goes on changing like the twinkling of stars, and there is no boredom, no stationary experience can ever be had in relation to God. He does not change, you change, but with every change you make, He offers a new face of the same qualities. So this is the message, Hamdo Sana Usi ko jo Zaat Javidani. Praise, the only object of praise, the only object worthy of praise is that which is everlasting. Man thinks or woman thinks that he or she have fallen in love with something which they will maintain, and they promise that they will never change. But little do they know of the realities of life. Things happen to break the fondest love between two people, and they are beyond human control. Accidents take place, and the love, instead of remaining a source of pleasure, becomes a source of torture, because there is no one Javedani except God. From the first angle, of the changeability of love, dependent on the change in the person you love, I can quote the example of a godly person with whom some worldly man had fallen in love, and so madly in love that he also succeeded in making the girl fall in love with him. Now this godly person did not want his daughter to marry to him, because he knew that he was a man of the world. He did not know what love of God was. But he wondered how to change his love for her. Instead of changing the love of the daughter for him, he conceived of a brilliant idea to change the love of the man for the daughter. Now, it's strange, and sometimes to some people it may appear to be rather a trying example to hear, because it jars on some people's sensibilities what he did. But to explain the subject, I have to quote that example, so please bear with me with patience. What he did was, he told that lover to return to his house after a month and to take his daughter away with him. He would readily send her off with him after a month. So both were very satisfied. But in the meantime, he started giving purgatives to the daughter and shaved her head off and collected all the filth, all the exudations somewhere in a pit, and threw her hair on the top of that. By the end of the month, she was so ugly, so horrible to look at, a mere skeleton of what she was, that when the sewer arrived, he respected him, paid him full respect and honor, and said, "Come on, take my daughter away with you." When he looked at her, he was horrified. is this the thing with which I had fallen in love? What you have done to her? He said, nothing. I'll give you the entire of that girl, of this girl, the whole of it, with which you had fallen in love. So this is one portion of this girl, and the other portion I'll take you to. And then he took him to the toilet, where all the filth was waiting for him. He said, that is all I have taken out of her. So this is the complete lady which had attracted you so much. Take both of them and build a whole out of it. Of course, it was not possible for that boy to even ever think twice of that girl. So this is what demonstrates the meaning of eternity as compared to the meaning of being finite. All beauty on earth is finite. The beauty of God is the only beauty which is infinite. And that which is finite rises to a level and then begins to fall, decline, and come to nothingness. All the purpose of love is lost. So Hazrat Masih Maud informs us, Hamdo sana usi ko, jo zaat javedani. Hamsar nahi hai uska koi, na koi sani. It is He alone, my beloved, my eternal beloved, whose beauty is permanent, everlasting. Why to fall in love with such people whose beauty is not trustworthy? It will change, and definitely change. Then this has the other message which I just mentioned before, that even if the object of human love is still attractive and charming and attractive in every way, there is no guarantee of his or her keeping companionship, keeping being available to you throughout. The companionship which is gained by love is not dependable because of the factors which are beyond our control. Even if you love the most wonderful person on earth, by an accident, either you lose her or she loses you, and you can't do anything about it. So that love which is not eternal can turn into a source of utter displeasure and suffering instead of being the source of pleasure. It's not just a case of a love between man and woman, it's a case of all loves. A mother loves her children dearly. Sometimes sisters love their brothers dearly. Sometimes the fathers love their girls and their sons and daughters dearly. In human relationship, this happens at different levels in every family and every relationship, but there is no guarantee for their remaining together. I have seen mothers who were so happy who were blessed with a beautiful child, who grew before their eyes to a manhood, and suddenly met with an accident and was lost. The pleasure she drew from the nearness of that beauty, that beloved son, appeared to be so transient and temporary and of short duration, but the suffering which followed seemed to be eternal. This is again the philosophy of love. Love of infinite, of finite things. The finite things, even if they remain in the prime of their beauty, can sometimes be taken away from you, and you have no power to hold them with you. The pleasure of such finite love, when it is lost, begins to become smaller and smaller and insignificant. All the years of nearness end up into nothing. They dissolve into thin air. But every second of suffering that follows becomes eternity. if you weigh them on the two scales, you come to the conclusion that the pleasure that the love gave you was more than taken away, more than offset by the misery it brought. So Hazrat Masih Maud draws our attention to the fact, Hamd sana usi ko jo zaat javedani. Fall in love with him who is everlasting, who will never ever abandon you, whose beauty will never wane, but grow in your sight, although it remains to be eternal. But your understanding, your concept of the beauty will always be on the increase. What a wonderful love that is, where you fall in love with someone who goes on displaying more charms and more beauty with the passage of time, and you're never tired. There is one verse of an Urdu poet which I especially like, and I have mentioned it before on the same subject, which says, जब भी देखा है तुम्हें आलम नौ, जब भी देखा है तुम्हें क्या? हाँ, नहीं गलत सही, I remember it. The word "ik" cannot fit into it because I know it will break the rhythm. But let's read it without it. The meaning would remain the same. जब भी देखा है तुझे आलम नौ देखा है, मरहला तय न हुआ तेरी शनासाई का. Whenever I have cast my glances upon you, I have seen a new universe born before me. The stages of nearness to you could never come to an end. So this is the meaning of falling in love with God. Whenever you see him, when you close upon him, you see him in a beauty of which you had no knowledge before. New face of God is born anew upon you. Well, despite the fact that he is unchangeable. So when you begin to travel into infinity, it can never end. This is the meaning of this verse, Hamd sana usi ko jo zaat javidani. Hazrat Masih Maud speaking on the same subject in one of his writings, speaks of an incident which took place in a city of the Punjab. A godly person was walking the street when he came across a woman who had lost her mind in love of someone who was separated from her, whom had met with an accident. She was absolutely crazy with agony. She went on wailing day and night, beating her own chest and naming him again and again and again. That is what was left to her, what was left of her, and that is what was left for her. This godly person addressed her and said, "Oh, mad woman, what happened to you? What has happened to you?" She said, "Everything has happened to me. All that I lived for is gone. I have lost the very purpose of my life. There is nothing else left in the world." It's such a void. So the man addressing her inquired from her that when you had fallen in love with that man, hadn't you realized that he was finite? He had to leave? And suddenly the wisdom dawned upon her. And he said, "Never thought of it, but you're right. I knew she was finite." So he said, "Why did you fall in love with a finite person who had to come to an end anyway?" If now, then later. This again is the meaning of this verse, the first line of this couplet. Hamdo sana usi ko jo zaat javidani. No accident, no mishap can take away your beloved, the eternal beloved God from you. So He alone is worthy of love and worship, none else is. Hamsar nahi hai uska koi na koi sani. Another profound philosophy of love has been explained here in the second line. In reality, we think that we fall in love with someone forever because we are loyal. This concept of loyalty is seldom properly understood. The loyalty requires the beloved to be the only one of that type in the world. If you find the like of him or someone better than him, then it is very normal and natural for you to begin to be gravitated towards that person. Because in fact you never fall for persons, you fall for beauty. Whatever concept of beauty you have. So in case of finding another personification of beauty of your ultimate desire, it will be difficult for you to remain loyal. You may remain loyal, but at some cost. Because the other person who comes into your life would begin to gravitate you towards himself, because he is the same ideal for which you had fallen in love, but an improvised model of the same ideal. Again, because nothing in human beauty remains everlasting, after a while, when you have fallen in love with some person, you begin to find less interest in the same things which had attracted you so powerfully. The love cannot last with the same force, with the same overwhelming strength, power of capturing your heart and your mind. Because once you attain the object of your desire, the moment you attain it, it begins to wane. The desire, once fulfilled, becomes to be satiated. It's a law of nature. You can't change it. What about feeling so thirsty for a cold glass of water? You drink a glass of water and then another and then another. And if a fourth or fifth one is offered you, you will hate to think of drinking it. Because the desire to drink is inevitably related to the urge for drinking, which is born out of thirst. And thirst for things are always satiated. That is why ladies want change in fashion and style. And you know it better than anyone else. After wearing a dress for a while, you get bored with it. And other people also get bored with it. What a lady that is, she's always dressed alike. So you go on changing, sometimes short skirts, sometimes long skirts, sometimes loose skirts, sometimes tight skirts, and this and that. It is a change in which you have attraction. But how much change you can bring about in things around you. You can't constantly change your husband, modeling him into a new thing. Can you? Most certainly not. What will be revealed from within him will not always be your ideal. And that is against the untrustworthiness of things in which we fall here on earth. You fall in love with somebody and he becomes familiar. And the familiarity breeds contempt. And after a while he is a good man, good companion, but that is all there is to him. But that is not all that there is to him. From within him begin to appear those ill habits, those traits in him which you abhor, which were suppressed, which were concealed, because he wanted to attract you. So when he becomes familiar with you, he does not care whether you like him anymore or not. So it's all right if you had fallen in with the beautiful side of my face, here is the ugly one for you as well. And the same happens to men at the hand of women. And you call it love. Where is the eternal pleasure in love anyway? Nowhere. And then when you fall sick and ill, all things of charm and beauty lose meaning to you. And there is no eternity within you in any way. Maybe the object of your love is the same beautiful person, but you are nauseated, you are vomiting, you are tired of life, you are suffering in every joint. What comfort can the face of a beloved person bring you in this state of utter misery? So this is the human love, and to which this Hazrat Mother Islam draws our attention, that in human love you will always find someone who could be better, or you will always find your beloved sinking into a level where he will be no more of any beauty or any charm or attraction to you. And in God, it's a completely different story. There is none like unto him. Neither there is a second to him. So he is the only object worthy of love. बाकी वही हमेशा, गैर उसके सब हैं पानी. He remains eternal. All things other than God disappear and come to an end. This universe will also come to an end. Even if you are given an eternal life, apparently eternal life on earth of 1,000 or 10,000 years, still ultimately you will come to an end. But love of God is eternal because God is eternal. गैरों से दिल लगाना झूठी है सब कहानी. Come to your senses. To fall in love with other than God is to fall in love with falsehood and lies. Everything else is false except God who is eternal. सब गैर हैं वही है इस दिल का यार जानी. Everyone else is an alien to you. He can't be you. He can't completely merge with your identity. It is only God who has the power to sink into you right to the very depth and own you in a way that your identity is lost into him and you become one. So he says everyone else remains another person, but not God. When you fall in love with him, he becomes Yare-Jani, the very soul and purpose of your love and desire. Now herein is also a different message, which means that although you fall in love with others, it is not always possible that the person of your love should also fall in love with you. The more lofty he is, the more beautiful he is, the more distant he also becomes. And even if he is not distant, he becomes the object of so many people's love that even if he so desires, it's impossible for him to share everybody's love at equal level. So you may love in vain and waste your life in love of somebody you can never attain. Now people I know or sometimes fall in love with great singers. People I know sometimes fall in love with the great actresses, some with queens and kings, some with rich people, great artists. But how can they share them, all of them together? It's impossible. that love cannot be returned. Only it is love of God which is always returned, and in a fuller measure than you can ever expect. When you love somebody, it is not always the nearness to him which satisfies you. More than that, a more profound reason for your satiation of any desire, like loving somebody and trying to have him, lies in the fact of response. Even if you possess your beloved and there is no response from him or her, that nearness would not mean anything. Some people who forcibly capture the object of their beauty, and whatever they may do to attain pleasure, they simply cannot, because no coercion can reach the heart, and no coercion can bring about the response from your beloved, which is of ultimate satisfaction to the lover. They go mad sometimes. Sometimes they kill the objects of their love in a frenzy of madness because they can't have it despite possessing it. So just mere possession is meaningless. The object of your love must respond to you. And if he responds, then even if you don't have him, it creates a sense of satisfaction which is so beautiful and so wonderful to live with. But in case of God, it's a different story. According to Hazrat Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you take one step towards him, he takes 10 steps towards you. If you walk towards him, he runs towards you. If you run towards him, he overtakes you, engulfs you, carries you, possesses you, and you get lost into him. This is Dil Ka Yare Jani. He is accessible to everyone. So remote, so lofty, so much different from us. He is so available. It's a fantastic thing that God is. So without knowing his attributes, how can you fall in love with him? And how can you realize the beauty of his attributes without seeing him from the eye of a lover who knows what he is, who knows what the meaning of love to God is? Then Hazrat Masih Maud Islam, in the end line which repeats, says, Dil mein mere yahi hai, Subhana man yarani. My heart is always filled with the awareness that holy is he who always watches me, always keeps me in his sight. So Dil Ka Yare Jani and Subhana man yarani have an internal bondage, inseparable bondage. I have not only become an object of his love, but he watches me more than I watch him. I am under his constant gaze. Well, I can have the lapses of oblivion. I can go to sleep and forget him. But Hazrat Masih Maud Islam, describing this awareness of being always watched with love by God, says, so many a time you sleep and he wakes for you. Many a time you are unaware of the plotting enemy, and he is aware, and he destroys the plots and frustrates the enemy's plans before they are implemented and realized. Now, of course, God is always awake. What is the meaning of he awakes for you? The meaning is that God is always awake, but is not awake for everybody. He is awake for only those who wake for him. And then their shortcomings are not counted, they disappear. You wake for him for an hour at night, then he wakes for you the entire 24 hours. This is the response of Allah's love. So why to fall in love with finite people, with people who cannot respond to your love with any guarantee, who can fall in love one moment and fall apart the other. But Allah is not like that. Hazrat Masih Maud paying tribute to him says that I have never seen a person more loyal than God is to his servants. You can't imagine how loyal is he to you. What a wonderful thing. You hear of his beauty and you fall in love. What would happen to you when you begin to see him, observe him, feel the nearness to him? It is that nearness which makes prophets mad in his love. It is that awareness which brings about that madness, which is the ultimate of wisdom. You think they sacrifice, but in the real sense they are the most selfish things on earth, because their bargain is most profitable. What is selfishness? For very little you pay, you try to get the best and the most. And that can only happen in relation to God. You suffer for a while for his sake, but his love takes away the sting of the suffering and changes it into a celestial pleasure, into a sublime sense of comfort which has no comparison in the world. Hazrat Masih Maud speaking on this subject says, हैं तेरी प्यारी निगाहें दिल बरा एक तेरे तेज जिससे कट जाता है सब झगड़ा गमे अगयार का. Oh my beloved, your loving sight, your loving gaze works like a sharp sword which severs all the network of animosity of people towards me, and cuts the pain and destroys it. So to call love, to think of love in the terms of sword, which destroys the pains and the network of suffering which the enemy has woven for you, is a beautiful idea. But again, it could not have been born into someone who had not tasted the true love of God. When he says, hai paak paak kudrat, azmat hai uski azmat. His majesty, his power to do things, is free from any blemish. Now why power? Because sometimes people fall in love with power. You know, many great people were quoted in history as great men of their ages. They are great only because they have fallen in love with power. Power has always been their purpose. And we think they are great people. But their power is not free from blemish. Sometimes it is riddled with ugliness. Sometimes it is poisoned with hatred of others. Just the love of pomp and power of this worldly things, worldly sovereignty. They shed human blood like filthy water. They do not care for what they do. They inflict immense misery on nations and nations for the sake of that glory which can be got only by being very to power. And people also bow to them and they become demigods. But what an ugly power that is. Hazrat Masih Maud tells us, if you have that bent of mind where you see power and greatness of holding power over others, even then turn to God, because the majesty of his power is free from all blemish. You'll become powerful with him and in him, and you'll gain a powerful friend who's so pure, and so free from all blemish that your path will become a source of beauty itself. है पाक पाक कुदरत, अजमत है उसकी अजमत. Greatness is His greatness. If you want greatness for yourself and you love greatness for the sake of acquiring it, then fall in love with God, because the real greatness is what belongs to Him. लर्ज़ां है अहले क़ुरबत, करूबियों पे है बस. It's a fantastic thing. Those who are away from great people, they tremble for the fear of their wrath. The more remote they are more likely they become the target of the wrath of big people, because they're like meaningless insects to them. But those who are close, they feel pride, they feel safe from everything. They do not tremble. But it's a strange statement which Masih Maud has made here. He says, लर्ज़ां है अहले क़ुरबत. His greatness is such that those who gain closeness with Him, they tremble in awe of His greatness. करूबियों पे है बस. And the angels who are close to Him are always under awe of Lord, and that humiliates them. Or not humiliates, but that makes them humble in relation to the greatness of God. Now this again, the true philosophy of the realization of somebody's greatness. If you come to a great man, come close to a great man, it so often happens that you lose awareness No, don't tell me that. They tell me that of the appointed time, only 5 minutes are left. And I have not yet started. What a shame. At the appointed time, they mean perhaps that the time we have bought for two-way connection with England and through England, with all the world, that time is coming to a close. But the subject is so vast, it's impossible to bring it to a short confinement. I can't. So let me talk as long as I can. And inshallah we'll take up the subject later on. But why shouldn't I bring what I have said to a conclusion? लर्ज़ां है अहले क़ुरबत, करूबियों पे हैबत. When you go close to the Himalayas, although you know them to be great, unless you go close to the Himalayas, you do not know what greatness is. The greatness of a mountain. You're always overawed, walking underneath a rock when there's an earthquake. That brings the reality of the greatness of mountains home to you like nothing else can. So he says it's a strange sort of closeness to Him. It does not make you cheeky and disrespectful. The closer you become, the greater you respect Him. Because then you truly know what greatness is. And when you are afraid of His greatness, it is then that He dawns upon you with a sense of peace which is everlasting, with a sense of protection. Because if you fear His greatness, He saves you from the greatness of all others. Then you are carried into His lap. And His greatness is not a source of harm and injury or a possible danger to you. It becomes the only source of protection. From all other great people whom you have denied, you have rejected for the sake of greatness of Allah. He says, you become kurubi, you became angels. But closer you get to God, more awed will you be, and safer will you become from the greatness of all others but God. Now this is the beginning of the second verse only, the second couplet. But here I have to come to an end with the final message which I want to deliver to you. Please remember this, that this love we experience here will certainly come to an end. And at the time of our death, we shall realize too late that our pursuits of pleasure were vain. They were meaningless. They deserted us in a state where we are no longer even to enjoy pleasure if we get it. People who enjoy fast food, for instance, sometimes destroy their stomachs and appetites to a degree where the very name of fast food becomes a source of nauseating. It nauseates you. You vomit at the thought of food. So huge change. And the things you love, even if they remain beautiful, are not available. They do not serve the purpose of being loved. So when you die, and every one of us must die, only then it dawns upon man that what he had done in his life is a sheer waste. He had come from eternity. In a very short time, space of time, he lived what he did, as he lived. And now is the time for him to return to eternity empty-handed, without knowing how to love him. That is how you can create your own hell. That is to the end to which we shall all come. So why take pride in the worldly possessions and the materialist gains of this world? Why go mad about music and the chasing of beauty on earth? Because it must come to an end, and a sad end for that matter. And you will return to your Lord if you have not learned to love him here. The paradise of his closeness will not be born upon you. You will not die with a taste for him. Do it now. And once you learn this, then you realize that the worldly pleasures lose meaning to you. Then you cannot be gravitated away from goodness. That's the only panacea for all evils of this world. It is the only panacea for the materialist pursuits. And it's not a panacea of sacrifice. It's a panacea of gain and nothing but gain. If you learn to live in love of God, mad are those people who think you have lost touch with pleasure. The love of God is the pleasure of the ultimate type, of the highest intensity and the highest quality. The love of God is something which is celestial, which is sublime, beyond the reach of ordinary people. But it is so easy to attain because it is God himself who teaches you how to love him. Try this formula and live in absolute eternal peace. Then when you come to the end of this life, you will not look with any sense of repentance at the lost time behind you. You look forward to the reaping of fruits of your love in the future, which is about to dawn upon you. That is the time when those who live a life of love of God, who live all their lives to seek praise of Allah, hear a voice from the heaven at the time of their death. Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainnah turja'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati. O that servant of mine who lived all his life seeking my pleasure and receiving my pleasure, who loved me and who was loved by me, Now it is a time for mourning for others, but not for you. You are returning to a heaven which has no equal, the heaven of nearness to God. So Allah would tell him and speak to every dying person here on earth who has gained his nearness in the life on earth. Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainnatul ja'i ila rabbika radiyatun mardiyyah. All your life you were so satisfied with me, and I was satisfied with you. Now return to me, return to my Jannah, that heaven which is my heaven, which is different from the heaven of other pious people. Because your heaven has always been nearness of mine, so here I will come to you so close that you could never have dreamed of that closeness before in your earlier life on earth. So enter that Jannah which is mine, enter that Jannah which is granted only to the servants of God. I hope we all endeavor towards that end. That's the ideal that we can meet here on earth. It should be said of us when we die, which an Arabic poet speaks of in terms of a comparison between birth and death of pious people. He says, "O man, when you were born, you were the only person who was crying. All the people around you were laughing. Die in a manner that it is you only who should laugh, and all else around you should cry and wail at your departure." This is my message to you. I hope you will take it to your heart and live with this message. This is the heaven upon earth which we can create for ourselves with the help of Allah. Allah bless you, and I take leave of you now. Let's join in prayer, please. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Assalamu alaikum. ये तो मैंने मांगी भी नहीं, पता नहीं कौन देगा वापस